Welcome to the channel. Thank you everybody for tuning in. On today's video, we are going to be comparing between two, arguably one of the nicest Submariner homages out there on AliExpress. First one being Cronos and the second one being the San Martin. Throughout this video, I will be highlighting the differences between both watches, minus the branding side of things. Now, you would be forgiven if you thought there was no visible difference between the two watches, and on the face of it, you really can't see. However, when you do look at both hand in hand and side by side, you'll actually be surprised with the amount of differences that you can notice. So let's go ahead and start looking into these. Now let's start off by first looking at the specifications. Both watches are spec'd exactly the same. They both have ceramic, sapphire, stainless steel, but the only difference is the movement. The movement in the Cronos is the PT 5000 high beat movement, whereas the one in the San Martin, as you know of course, is the NH35. So the visual difference that you'll have is the PT 5000 ticks at 8 ticks a second, whereas the NH35 is a 6 ticks per second movement. So there is a slight difference in overall smoothness of the sweep, but is that something which you'll really pay attention to, and does it really stand out that much? I don't think it actually does. The second difference between the movements is of course the rated accuracy out of factory. The rated accuracy on the San Martin, which uses the NH35, is -20 to +40 seconds a day, but in reality it runs a lot more accurate than that, averaging around, in my experience, about 10 seconds a day. With the PT 5000, out of the factory, it's rated at ±12 seconds. So there is a tighter tolerance within the PT 5000, of course, and it has more joules as well, at 25 joule count. Now, is there any difference in the actual dimensions of both watches? I can tell you there isn't. You've only got a small ±2-3 millimeters, which is a normal tolerance, but both are 40 mil diameter. Both have a lug to lug of 48 mil. The only difference is within the thickness. The San Martin coming in at 12.7 and the Cronos coming in at 13.2. No doubt that is because of the protruding crystal, which brings us to the first difference that you'll see, at least when you look at the measurements between both watches. They've both got a 20 mil lug width, and they both use similar types of bracelets, and the tapering is the same as well, from 20 mil down to a 16 mil at the clasp. Now at this shot, because I've synced up both watches, now you can see the very small difference between the beat rate between both watches, at least on the face of it visually. The Cronos does have a slightly smoother sweep, but overall it's not something which is that much of a difference. Now when we look at both watches closer, you'll see on the dial there actually is no difference, aside of course from the color and the branding. As I mentioned, you've got slightly different fonts. You've got the font or the text which says something else. You do have a printed frame around the date window on the Cronos, but other than that, the style of the applied indices and the style of dial is exactly the same between the two. If anything, the actual applied indices themselves, they both look kind of off-white. They don't have that brilliant white in either of them. Now the hands that both watches use are also exactly the same. Both the mini and the hour hand are chamfered, and the seconds hand, there's no difference. Now the difference is where we are going to see is when we take a closer look at the lume. Now when we compare the lume shots, the San Martin on the left does have way better lume. Now this is just lume that's been generated from the normal LED lighting within this room. When we do hit it with a UV lamp, you'll see that that difference becomes less noticeable. However, I do feel that the San Martin dial does use slightly better lume on the hour markers and the hands than the one on the Cronos. Now the next visual difference which you see is when we look at the actual bezel itself. The one on the right, the San Martin, the scallops, the points on the edge of the bezel are slightly spikier, whereas on the Cronos they're a bit more subdued. It's a lot smoother. Now interestingly enough, the V2 San Martin had a similar bezel style to the one that you see on the Cronos. Purely subjective, it depends what you like and what you like to feel. I prefer the smoother edged option on the Cronos. However, the one on the San Martin, it does look good as well. It gives you a bit more of a sea dweller homage, sort of aesthetic there. But they're both nice. Now it's just down to sort of how they actually function as a bezel. Now when we look at the rotations, it's worth mentioning both bezels are actually really good. The one on the San Martin, you get a bit more of a tactical feel, and you know, you got that accuracy as well. There is no playback. It's just a different sound that the San Martin makes. Now, when we compare that to the Kronos, it's just a more of a buttery, smooth sound. The rotation is a lot smoother, and it just feels, or maybe sounds like a more of a premium style of bezel. However, I know they're both the same, so it's this one just going to be purely subjective, and but there is a difference between the sound and feel of both bezels. You can also see the difference in the crystal. On the Kronos, it protrudes quite a bit, whereas on the San Martin, it's sitting really flush. A preference for me is for the crystal to sit flush. I think it is just a bit oversized on the Kronos, and plus it adds to that thickness. There's a 0.5 mm difference in the thickness on both watches. Now, when we move over to the case, there is one main difference that we'll see. The brushing and the polishing is the same on both cases. If I can bring your attention to the bottom and top of the cases towards the lugs on both watches, if you look at the Kronos one, you can just see a line. So the case is a bit straighter towards the bottom and it curves slightly after, whereas on the Kronos, there's more of an inclined gradual curve. Now, I can't show you at this side, so I'll try and explain it better with the side profile. Now, hopefully this picture makes it a lot easier to understand. If you look at the side profile, I've got the San Martin at the bottom and the Kronos at the top. Where the slope on the San Martin declines gradually, on the Kronos above, it seems to go straighter and then it curves. Now, that is visible over on the A face with the brushing and the light hits it. And very subtle difference, but again, you know, only with both of them side by side then can you really compare. So when we take out the calipers, we can see the actual difference. Exactly where I'm measuring it is a measurement of 5 mil, and when we look at the Kronos, it comes to 5.6. So there's a 0.6 difference. Now, for the next difference, we need to look at the end links of the bracelets that have been attached to both watches. If you look at the bottom one, which is the San Martin, there the end link is shorter, therefore you get a bit of a gap between the actual lug ends and the end links of the bracelet. Move up, look at the Kronos, and the Kronos does seem to be sitting a bit better, a bit more in line with the case, but you also have that gapping issue on the side on the Kronos, very visible. The bracelet end link on the top measures at 19.6, whereas the one of the Kronos is a lot closer to 20 mil. I'd say, you know, with the tolerances I'm working with, it's not very precise, so I'd say about 19.9. So you get a tighter, a better finish on the actual San Martin. The next difference you're going to see on the bracelet is when it comes to the bracelet links. Now, they're all solid and the brushing is great and pretty much exactly the same amongst both. But the difference is when you turn the watch on the side. Now, on the top, those are the links for the San Martin. Now, the sides have been brushed. You've got screw-in links, and they're also 3.4 mil in thickness. Look at the Kronos, they're actually 2.8 in thickness, and the sides are polished again with screw-in links. Now, the final difference that we see on the bracelet is, of course, when it comes to the clasp. You've got this very functional, very refined clasp that San Martin use with 6 micro adjusts. It sounds nice, the flip lock mechanism works really nice. You know, it's a milled clasp, scissor style clasp, brushing, and it's also got San Martin's logo on the flip lock. Now, my only issue with this clasp is I've wore this watch in and around the house and at work. The length of that clasp is actually 40 millimeters. Now, when you put this on a wrist size like mine, which is 6.5 inches, it does take up most of your wrist. So what I found when I was desk diving, had my wrist down, the clasp was actually digging into my wrist and it was quite uncomfortable to the point where I actually stopped wearing it to work because my obviously hands are down, I'm working at a PC. Now, when you look at the Kronos, the clasp is a more traditional style clasp, again flip lock, similar mechanism. It's slightly less refined than the San Martin one. It's obviously similar to the actual Rolex Submariner minus a few additional extras. You've got 3 micro adjusts on there, but the comfort is slightly better because that clasp is only around 35 millimeters long. So on a smaller wrist, it does fit me a lot better. It's a bit more comfortable. But with this one in particular, there's no really audible clicks when you do close it and engage the flip lock. So I think this one is going to be another subjective one, depends what you like, and I think the wrist size is going to be a distinguishing factor. If you've got the bigger wrist, then the longer clasp should be okay. But like I said, I only really felt it at work. In and around the house, there's no problem. But so I don't mind either, to be honest. How do we summarize final thoughts? Well, in order to do that, let's look at the prices first. The San Martin you can get from AliExpress for around £155. Initially, when they did come out, they were a bit more than this. Now, if we look at the Cronos, that is currently sitting at 167. What is the main difference between the two? Of course, the movements. One uses the PT5000 and one uses the NH35. So I think a lot of the aspects on this watch are going to be subjective and down to personal preference. For me, I think the main one's going to be branding. There's people that don't like the San Martin logo as well. I don't mind the hex logo, actually. It kind of suits this watch. But again, that's just my opinion. The watch game is so subjective. What it is looking like is that the San Martin is slightly refined, just a touch more with regards to the crystal, the bracelet, the clasp. But the Kronos isn't far behind. If anything, the bracelet on the San Martin is slightly edgier, not sharp, but just you can feel an edge, whereas the Kronos one is very smooth. The bezel, I prefer the bezel on the Kronos. I love that way that rotates. I love the functionality of that. I just like how it feels. Not to say the San Martin one is bad. So there's a lot of differences here which are going to be very subjective. But value for money, they're very close. And I think if you can live with the slight little issues that you get on the Kronos and you're happy with the branding, then definitely go with the Kronos, because you get to experience a different movement, a high beat movement as well, which overall should be more precise over the years to come. But yeah, that's my final thoughts on it. It is a tough one. I'll actually really interested in hearing what you guys think and what you would get and why. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're interested in any of these watches, check the links in the description where you'll find the AliExpress affiliated link in there for both watches and both stores. So that's it for me today. I really enjoyed the comparison. I bet you guys didn't really think there'd be that many differences, right? So yeah, I'll see you on the next video. Thank you for watching.